Hello, and welcome to another episode of Mad Scientist Brewing Beer Education Series. This week's video is going to look at the strong bitter style, which you may have also heard of as extra special bitter, or ESB, although that is a trademark for Fuller's Brewery and is not widely used. Also as English Pale Ale, when otherwise not referred to as a bitter, particularly in the US or anywhere where a bitter would be put into a bottle or even a can rather than on cask. And I'm also going to be tasting along with Geary's Original Pale Ale, which is one of the first craft breweries, well, the first craft brewery in Maine, at the very least. And I'm actually going to dip into a bit about this particular beer in the brewery at the end of this video, mostly just as a tribute to David Geary, who sadly passed away last week. Unfortunately, I didn't have enough time after learning that to include something in last week's video about that. But so I decided to dedicate this to his original beer, the English Pale Ale. So, cheers. All right, so let's first take a look at the vital statistics of this beer. All right, so looking at the statistics here, alcohol-wise, this is the strongest of the bitter family and has an ABV of 4.6 to 6.2 percent alcohol, which puts it into the normal alcohol range and slightly into the elevated range at that higher end there. It has an original gravity of 1.048 to 1.060, or 11.9 to 14.7 degrees Plato. It has a final gravity of 1.010 to 1.016, or 2.6 to 4.1 degrees Plato. It has an IBU range of 30 to 50 and a pronounced perceived bitterness, and an SRM range of 8 to 18, putting it into a gold to amber color range. So appearance-wise, you're going to have that light amber to almost a deep copper color for some examples. That will have good to brilliant clarity with low to moderate white to off-white head on it. And a low head is acceptable when the carbonation is also low in the case of serving this on cask. If you were getting a bottle-conditioned pour, you will probably have a standard head and carbonation to it. Aroma-wise, the hop aroma is moderately high to moderately low, typically with floral, earthy, resiny, or fruity character. It has a medium to medium high malt aroma as well, optionally with low to moderate caramel component. It has medium low to medium high fruity esters, and generally no diacetyl, although very low levels are allowed. Flavor-wise, it's similar to the aroma. You have medium to medium high bitterness that are supporting the malt flavors that are there. And the malt profile is typically bready, biscuity, nutty, or a little toasty, and optionally has moderately low to moderate caramel or toffee flavor. The hop flavor is moderate to moderately high, and similar with the aromas, typically floral, earthy, resiny, or fruity character. The hop bitterness and flavor should be noticeable, but they should not totally dominate over the malt flavors here. Moderately low to high fruity esters are usually present, and optionally may have low amounts of alcohol flavor, especially at the higher end. It has a medium dry to dry finish, and again, generally no diacetyl, but very low levels are allowed. For mouthfeel, it's got a medium light to medium full body, low to moderate carbonation, although the bottled versions are going to be higher again. Stronger versions may have slight alcohol warmth, but the character for that should not be too high. All right, the characteristic ingredients for the strong bitter. You're going to have British pale ale, amber, or crystal malts, and may use a touch of black malt if you want for color adjustment. Like a lot of British styles, it may use some sugar adjuncts, as well as corn or wheat. English finishing hops are most traditional, but any hops are fair game. They're actually a mix of English and American hops used in the original pale ale from Geary's here. If the American hops are used, it would require kind of a light touch because they can otherwise tend to overpower this beer. You would use a characterful British yeast to get those nice esters there, and somewhat what's known as the Burton versions of this, which originated from Burton-on-Trent, from where you've got the basis of your really hoppy beers and IPAs. Would use medium to high sulfate water, which are going to increase the perception of dryness and add a minerally or sulfury aroma and flavor sometimes. The original pale ale from Geary's actually did specify that it was a Burton take on this style, although thankfully I'm not picking up a ton of sulfur or mineraliness from this, but it is quite a dry beer. All right, the history of this. Strong bitters are effectively the higher gravity versions of a best bitter, moving up the chain of the bitter family. British pale ales are generally considered to be export strength bitters that are reformulated for putting into a bottle compared to having it in a cask, since you're going to be carbonating that with a little bit of extra yeast and sugar. The modern British pale ale, or English pale ale, is considered synonymous with a bottled version of strong bitter, although historically these styles were different. If you're going to compare with other styles, there is more evident malt and hop flavors in this than are in the special or best bitter, as well as having more alcohol. Stronger versions may overlap somewhat with the British strong ales, although strong bitters tend to be paler, and a bit more bitter. More malt flavor and esters are found here than in an American pale ale, and with a different finishing hop character. Lastly, some commercial examples. You have Bass Ale, Fuller's ESB, as I mentioned at the start. ESB is actually a trademark of Fuller's, so in the UK at least you won't see any other beers labeled ESB or extra special bitter, or extra strong bitter even, although a lot of American breweries taking this on have kind of adopted that moniker. You've also got Samuel Smith's Organic Pale Ale, and of course what I'm drinking here, Geary's Original Pale Ale. And before closing out, just wanted to talk a little bit about Geary's brewery itself, kind of in honor of David Geary. So David Geary opened this brewery, established it anyway, at least in 1983, at a time when in the United States there were fewer than 20 craft breweries in existence. When he opened D.L. Geary's Brewing Company in Portland, Maine, it was the first one to open east of the Mississippi River since Prohibition had started. He got the help of a British brewer named Alan Pugsley, who is pretty famous in the Northeast for kind of being the Johnny Appleseed of New England breweries. And after helping D.L. Geary, he went on to establish another 80 breweries across New England. But he had started off with Geary's, and by 1986, they had produced the first beer and started serving that at $3 Dewey's down in Portland. And that kind of kicked off the whole things from there. After that, I mean, you had Gritty's opened up, eventually Rob Todd and Allagash opened up, and craft brewing in Maine, as we know it, all originated because of D.L. Geary and his desire to bring something a little more tasty and different to the beer scene here in Maine. So I'm very appreciative of him. I make a point to stop over at the brewery whenever I can if I'm visiting family in Portland. I always thought it was a bit unfortunate that Geary's brewery is set aback, a couple streets away from Industrial Way, where all the other breweries are in a cluster there, and I feel like he may not get as much business at Geary's. But if you get a chance, go ahead and stop in when they're open. Show them some support. He actually had sold it to some other partners a few years ago and had been removed from the actual brewery for a little bit, but still it's nice to support them, and especially us brewers here in Maine, remembering where effectively we all came from. So thank you, David Geary, for everything you did. And until next time, cheers.